Right, ladies and gentlemen, we're about ready for our next speaker here. We've got Pranav from Phasebox. He's going to talk to us about applying blockchain technology to the music industry. Big deal. Round of applause for Pranav.
Thank you everyone for being here. I'm going to talk about the possibilities of using blockchain in the music industry. Now, the music industry is a very eclectic industry where we have in front of us notice very many changes and how each and every change could be predicted as a possibility of an ending of a sort. However, we're going to discuss some positive things about blockchain itself, and just to give you a bit of background about myself, I'm the founder and CEO of Phasebox, and we're trying to solve some problems related to the music industry, and we're incorporating blockchain on our platform, and just trying to be as efficient as we can. So a little bit about the music industry itself. There are four broad sections in the music industry. First one would be the recording industry, which deals with service providers in the recording industry, like recording studios, mixing engineers, mastering engineers, and this would directly relate to the sales of any form of physical or digital music. Then there's live music, which has always been the sort of primary way of consumption of music, and is the oldest way of consuming music as well, and you cannot beat a live music experience. Artist management, which is the sort of area that deals with artists functioning as a brand of their own and a company. And there are teams that revolve around achieving the best results out of an artist's career, and giving the artist the best sort of resources and platforms to expand their reach. And there's the publishing industry, which is not very talked about, but this is the industry that deals with managing rights and licensing these rights for usage in basically all forms of media, like TV advertisements, movies, and everything where we can hear music. And there is a sort of saying in the music industry where if the music gets played, someone gets paid. And oftentimes, many people get paid in these processes because of publishing itself. So this is about the evolution of our sort of music consumption, where in the older times, music was written on sheet, and these sheets were essentially manuscripts, and manuscripts had to be copied by hand, or people would just notice pieces in live performances itself and try to replicate them, go by ear and try to play them. Then there was the start of the printing press, which enabled people to have sheet music printed. And again, this was something that caused people to think that this would be the end of the live music industry, because people could just play the pieces at home. However, the composer and the live performers add their own touch to the piece of music, and we have still retained the essence of enjoying live music performances itself. Then came the piano roll, which was a mechanical device, basically a piece of roll of paper with perforations that could be put into a mechanical player piano, they used to call it. And this would let the piano play the piece itself. So you can hear the recording by just inserting a roll of paper into a player piano. Again, this caused concerns in the music industry itself as well. After which, there's of course the vinyl stage, where initially vinyl were made of shellac, which is a relatively fragile material, and again, this caused people to think of the sheet music industry to be ending as well, which of course didn't happen, because it's got its own uses, and sheet music is primarily used for music publishing as well, which then leads to licensing and uses in different forms of media. This was succeeded by radio, of course, and especially during wartime when live performances were limited, radio stations would bring in live musicians to have performances broadcasted into, well, the world. And again, this was a point where people were, concerned about the music industry itself, and this was, of course, replaced by the television. And famously, we've all heard, video killed the radio star. And yeah, which again didn't happen, just adds a visual element to music itself. Well, finally, we come to the last form of sort of physical revolution in the music industry in terms of consumption, which is the CD. And the CD did the same. There was similar concerns. It's just like a more efficient device with a lighter format that it would carry of music itself, and it could reach a lot of people. Very many problems were raised about this form of consumption as well. However, this reduced the cost of breakage, and record labels adopted this model very easily. Then we have the online transformation, which could be seen in many ways. Of course, some of us might be familiar with LimeWire, where it was one of the most popular forms of peer-to-peer file sharing, which encouraged a lot of illegal downloads. Not healthy for the music industry itself, but increased the audience of music around the world and made people aware of music that they wouldn't have heard otherwise. And there was Napster, which was, again, a peer-to-peer file sharing service where people could access everything in terms of their musical needs at their own ease. Of course, there was Pandora as well, internet radio, which caused a lot of concerns to a lot of people and sort of had a bit of a disorientating effect on the music industry itself. However, this was then regulated by Spotify later on, and the streaming model seems to be the most efficient and easily responsive model of the current age. And of course, then there's YouTube. There are many companies like that who've tried to revolutionize music consumption with the ease of access we've all got to the internet. However, there's still a couple of problems that need solving, and there are people trying to solve these, but just to give you a bit of an idea of the problems, there's geographical limitation to a person's network, which can limit, from the point of view of an artist, limit the artist from networking with personnel that could get on board with their own product in terms of building that particular artist's brand. Yeah, and then there's variable pricing. Often, if any of you have tried looking for a recording studio or any sort of musical tech service, there's no transparent pricing, and you have to inquire, and they would give you a price code based on your level of reach or the kind of label you're assigned to. There's quality discrepancy, which is based on geographical reasons as well. Certain file formats are preferred in certain parts of the world, primarily due to the lack of better file formats and music tech equipment present in those countries. I personally, I've got the background of being a singer-songwriter, and I've dealt with all these problems. And of course, I've worked as a freelance music mixing engineer and producer as well, which brings me to the supply and demand void. There are a lot of people going into music tech and creative music courses in the UK itself these days, and every year graduates come out from these courses, and there's kind of a monopoly of these services, which is captured by agencies at the moment. However, there is a lot of demand for these services, but the supply isn't met. by the lack of scaling in these agency format companies. The age of the artist. If you would have noticed on social media, there are a lot of services helping out upcoming musicians and artists these days, which has led to a surge of musical artists coming up, and even music producers creating beats, sharing them with rappers or hip-hop artists. There's a big demand for that sort of an industry as well. And however, there is the ease of access to the music tech resources these days. There is a lack of reachability in terms of putting yourself out there as a musician. And people are trying to solve these problems, but this is sort of where the age of the artist comes into place. And it's essentially a case of recognizing a musician as the products released by the musicians as a commodity and consuming them in that way, and making sure everyone gets a fair share. So in terms of the current usage of blockchain itself, certain companies have been coming up with solutions to some of these problems. And these would include solutions like online streaming services, where all the revenue goes to the appropriate people holding the rights to recordings, or the artists themselves. And these artists tend to be without a major label, or go with the term indie musician. There are also companies trying to solve problems in sort of just networking as well. This comes from the problem I mentioned before, which was the geographical problem, really. And yeah, so we can find loads of companies trying to solve this sort of thing already, and we'll briefly look into what can happen in the future. So I'm sure all of you are familiar with blockchain itself, and blockchain promotes a lot of ideologies that are good for ethics anyway, and incorporating that in the music industry can build a lot of trust in people, and can encourage people to reach goals that they wouldn't have planned of reaching in the past. And these possibilities can be seen in articles where people are trying to enlist different sort of users of blockchain itself. And yeah, just there's a lot of possibilities of innovation in this field itself. And since it's an open source technology where we can figure out different sort of uses and implications, we can try to make the music industry function in a bit more sort of ethical way. So just to end with something I'm working on, which is Phasebox. We are trying to solve some of these problems through our platform. And these would include problems that we solve through a few of our products. Like we have primarily got a peer-to-peer marketplace where musical services can be exchanged. And it promotes a fair transaction in terms of musical services, which is pre-existent in offline media, or can be achieved through contacting agencies, but this is more of a tech approach. We've got something we're calling a beat marketplace, which is to cater to people supplying beats to hip-hop artists and people who are basically just music producers. We've also got Shockmount Magazine, which is our product that is a non-profit product, and is the goal of the product is to encourage people to get into music tech and get access to knowledge to music of music tech resources. Yeah, that's about it. I would like to open the floor to questions if you've got any.
Theo has a question.
Hi, sorry I arrived a little bit late to your talk. If I have beats, how do I make money with your platform?
Okay, so the way to do that is by using blockchain, we would have a chain of commands to grant licenses to people without having to contact any person itself. So the rights would be cleared by the blockchain itself. And so you could just essentially upload your beats to the platform itself, and they would be featured or could be used by anyone looking for those sort of beats. And there are filters to sort of distinguish your beats from any other beats, I guess. So that can highlight your work in comparison to anyone else. Thank you.
Was that a hypothetical question, or do you actually have beats? He has beats. This guy has beats. Anyone wants beats? Go see Theo. Who else would like to ask the question? My man up here. It's all good, matey. Here it comes.
Okay. How to phrase this? Why does your service need to use a blockchain at all? It's a peer-to-peer service, and I don't see where the blockchain part of it comes in.
Okay, to answer that, we've got other products as well that have better uses for blockchain itself. But a lot of these services are not regulated in today's market in terms of the copyright issues. And rights are distributed amongst all the rights holders within a musical product. And yeah, so a lot of these services can have a one-off fee that waive that right, which is what happens in most of these cases. But there's also the option of reducing the cost of the service itself and having a stake in the rights. So the blockchain technology would help sort of regulate that. Does that answer your question?
Kind of. So where are the beats stored? Are you saying, are they stored on the blockchain? Because there's an argument to say that using the blockchain for storage is not a worthwhile use of it, or the best use of it, let's say.
No, it would essentially be stored on a cloud database, and the blockchain would only preview a lighter version of the file itself. All the files would be WAV, which is industry standard in the music industry. However, if when you're previewing file, you would be previewing a lighter version, like an M4A format file, and yeah, that's essentially it.
Alrighty then. Who else would like to ask a question of Pranav? Anybody else have a question? I've got one. How did you come up with the name Phasebox? Is that phase as in sound?
Phase is a technical term in music, and you say two musical recordings are, well, not recordings itself, but two files are in or out of phase.
Right.
So it's kind of like
harmony.
you
Almost.
come out, well, we join Phasebox being out of phase, and you go out being in phase.
Got you.
Logo incorporates the peer-to-peer sort of symbol as well.
Yeah, got you. Anyone else have a question? Oh, man right here.
So Theo had a good talk earlier about ownership of art on the blockchain, and this is a form of art itself. So is there a way that you could use the blockchain to maybe limit the ability for people to just torrent and get stuff for free? Like, is it possible to claim ownership more like definitely using the blockchain, basically, of like your beats or your songs, or?
Well, there are different types of licenses in terms of art as well. There's the Creative Commons license, which lets people use the sort of product itself in certain ways, and there's variations of these licenses already. It's about the creator of the art to choose how they want to promote that, and of course waiving certain rights and letting people use certain creation of an artist can encourage people to use it, and can be a way to popularize their sort of art form as well. Of course, like there could be, users of blockchain in this sense as well.
It's kind of that age-old problem of piracy. It's like, if you can see it, you can steal it, right? Because nothing's to stop you from, like, recording a movie with your phone, or similarly putting the mic towards a speaker. Even if you've paid for that content, you can get a copy of it. But largely with piracy, it's a problem of convenience, right? And the record labels are always fighting digital music, and so people are like, well, give us an easy way to get access to the music then. Don't fight it. The music label should have invented Napster, right? And just took the market, because that was the only way they could have saved themselves from just being taken over by those other services. But they resisted it, saying, no, you've got to buy the CDs. We're going to stay in the old world. And people are like, no, we're not going to stay in the old world. We'll just use LimeWire if we have to and pirate it. So if it was a matter of convenience. I don't think 80% of people who pirate the music, they don't want to pirate it. They want convenience, right? Some people will still always steal it. But my belief is that if you make it super, 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 super easy to buy and make it cheap enough, people are like, well, it's easier just to buy it from a legitimate source than download from LimeWire. Oftentimes, the title of the track wasn't actually the content of the music. So you'd be like, you downloaded it 6 or 7 times before you actually got the music track you thought you were getting. So you're like, I'll pay 10p. I'll just pay the 10p. Just give me an easy way to do it, right? So what do you think of that, mate?
Sure, yeah. So there's this interesting thing I noticed not too long ago, which was something Louis C.K., who's a comedian, tried. And he tried to sell individual episodes of a series with a certain cost price. So you could download individual episodes from that series by paying a fixed price. And it doesn't have to do anything with streaming. You can literally just download a copy. And it sort of, in its own way, makes it easier. And the only source where you could get it from would be Louis C.K.'s respective website. And this would also mean that this process is essentially eliminating any sort of geographical reach of, say, if the same series was televised through a network in America, people in Australia would not be aware of this. And anyone who's got access to the internet can just buy a copy. So that sort of a model is good, of course. And iTunes came in with this model initially, where people in the music industry say the album is essentially dead because of the sort of bite-sized consumption we're used to of everything, really. So people are used to buying singles, and in the previous times where you would have to buy a CD or a vinyl, you would have to buy the whole album and have to listen to the whole thing. So it's essentially coming back to something from the vinyl age, because vinyl was essentially sold in singles as well, with side A and side B. So now you can, it's heading towards a direct consumer approach where you get exactly what you want, and everyone is sort of responsible.
I'm going to go back to my man's question over here, because what I heard when he said that was like, how do you guarantee that you're not going to pirate the song, right? Well, I thought, the only way of doing that is to hash the entire contents of the song, the whole 4 megabytes, say, and stick that in the blockchain. Because then you could do things like YouTube when they run their algorithms to, like on the recordings we're doing here, you can't play any copyrighted music, even in the background. For like 5 seconds, the YouTube algorithm will be like, that's Sony music, demonetized, right? Not allowed to do that kind of thing. So the only way to really prevent the problem of piracy would be to put the entire contents of the song in the blockchain and then use that as a fingerprint. And then whenever that fingerprint is hid, if you like, say, no, sorry, that belongs to Pranav or whatever. But even then, that still doesn't necessarily prevent the microphone to the speaker thingy, because it only needs to be different enough. It's kind of like worming around a patent. It only needs to be different enough for the algorithm to think, oh, that's a different type of music. So I don't think there's a 100% way of preventing piracy forever, but making it more difficult to pirate and making the pirate versions inferior quality, and at the same time making it super convenient and super cheap to just buy it from the official source, I think that's the best incentive model, is where I was going with it.
Yeah, so this is something I was trying not to talk about, but we've got another product in the works, which is a notary blockchain, which would convert a digital recording into a binary signal and include that as a code in a block, essentially. So you have a copyright to the exact technical recording. However, then there's of course the creative author copyright, which has different sort of rights, and often we forget because we think the artist always has the right to these royalties essentially, but along the way to negotiate prices and do different things and working with a label itself can get you to lose a lot of sort of equity on your own work. So when we think of everyone getting a fair share of their own sort of musical work, it's not the artist who gets paid only. There are multiple people working.
Gotcha. Has that stimulated any more questions in the room? Yes, it has. That's what I'm talking about.
Sorry, just out of interest, have you created your own blockchain, and sort of how far have you got with the process?
Yeah. So we're heading towards a launch towards the end of this year, and we have been working this product for the past 2 years, and essentially started with me noting all the problems I face as a singer-songwriter and a mixing engineer or a producer, where I couldn't find access to a lot of these sort of real-world clients. So essentially it started with me enlisting these problems. Now we've got a great team on board who's working on finding ways to solve these problems. And so everything's heading towards a sort of a good launch towards the end of the year, and we've got all the technology bits sorted as well.
Excellent. Anybody else like to ask a question? Oh, yes. Let's go to this guy. I'll be back to you in a sec.
How are you going to promote this, your site?
Can you say that again, please?
How are you going to promote it, especially for people who like Elvis and old type of people?
Well, so if I understand correctly, you're saying are we planning to promote the website itself as a platform?
Yeah, to the general public.
So what we're trying to do essentially is provide a sort of source of income to a lot of people in the music industry, and it's hard to explain to people why there's a need for such a thing. And of course, we're going to be using marketing sort of strategies and things to get our product out there. And hopefully this just helps a lot of people. And once people use it, they can just find its benefits on their own.
So here's a question. Who needs Phasebox the most?
I would say someone who's a singer-songwriter with essentially just a song, rough demo.
The artist, then?
The artist, but then again, all these needs of the artists are fulfilled by the service providers in the music industry. So service providers need to join this sort of scheme of things, so they can benefit from getting more clients, essentially. So it's marketed towards singer-songwriters and artists and bands, but it provides sort of clientele to a lot of people working in the music industry.
Gotcha. You just want to ask a question, mate?
I'm sorry, it's me again. You said that you're going to make your own blockchain. By that, do you mean your own blockchain from scratch, or are you talking about riding on someone else's blockchain, like an ERC20 or an ERC223?
So I'm not great with technical details, but we are forking the technology from Ethereum, and that's just the most appropriate way for us to go. And yeah.
So it sounds like a dedicated.
Sorry to disappoint, but yeah, I just lack the technical details to answer your question.
Right, so you're talking about using Ethereum as the base, if you like. So you're talking about doing it as an ERC20 or an ERC223 or one of these others.
No,
I'm
exactly.
not familiar with those terms, sorry.
I think what he means is they took the Ethereum code base and started a dedicated version of Ethereum that backs this. So they'll be side by side rather than ERC20. Forking the code, not the blockchain, right? And that's
Forking
very
the
super
API
technical.
to sort of build our platform on that.
Anybody else like to ask a question? Over there. Our resident mining expert is going to ask a question.
Hi, right. Thank you very much for that. I'll just try to understand kind of if I was, so correct me if I'm wrong, but from my understanding of what you said today, you're trying to develop a product which would enable revenue to be shared in a more fair manner across the industry, particularly to the artist themselves.
That's a part of the process, but essentially this is scaling in terms of reaching service providers around the world who have the capability to provide these services that there is a high demand for, and catering to all the artists and bands who are contributing to this high demand. So it's a sort of demand supply exchange that we're catering to, while taking care of everything in terms of royalty distribution ethically.
Okay, because it kind of leads into my next question really, which is if I am, if this, as you said before, this is designed for artists themselves, you know, if I'm a lead singer in a band, ultimately I want my music to be heard by as many people as possible. Why would I choose to work with someone like you versus trying to get a larger deal with someone else where my music would be of a larger exposure? And if your development as a business is critical upon working with these larger partners, then isn't that going to be very difficult for you to lever, knowing that they could roll out what you've done in their own instance, in their own iteration? So what is it that protects the artist from wanting to choose you in the first place? And what is it that stops other people? What are the barriers to entry that you've created that would stop these larger organizations doing what you've done?
So thanks for that question. Essentially, what this comes to is, what you're talking about is marketing someone's music. And of course, that can be reached by having a better sort of resource in marketing, which is of course accessible to major labels, which would be beneficial. But marketing is done after you've got a releasable product to create a releasable product. So say if I have a rough demo, I need to contact a music studio to record all the bits for the songs, and I would have to hire a producer of my liking to essentially act as a recording engineer and a producer for the session itself. This would then give us the recorded files, which need to be sent to a mixing engineer who's going to mix all these files, which involves things like level balancing, panning, and basically polishing it heard. And after the mixing engineer is done with the files, it is sent to a mastering engineer who masters the musical file according to the media it's sent to. So all these sort of processes are hard to get a hold of. You can have a label, and a lot of artists these days have distribution deals with labels, so which is essentially just using the label's network to have a wider audience reach. However, you do need a basic musical product that's releasable. And this is also applicable to songwriters, because these days, if say I want to write a song for Adele, I would have to have a release quality product with me that I would have to also have a music publishing deal with my publishing company. The publishing company is then going to send that to respective rights holders to Adele's music, and this then goes to a record label, to Adele's team. Adele will listen to it. This come back through that exact chain of commands, and that's when I would get a musical artist like Adele to actually listen to a piece of work that is essentially written for that artist itself. So to sort of answer that, like even songwriters who are not aiming to be the front man or the performers of that music have to have a release quality product. And since the prices are not competitively sort of placed in the music industry for these services, just someone starting out as a songwriter can miss out on these opportunities, and that does happen where badly produced demos are just outrightly rejected. So it caters to a lot of different people, and essentially this is highlighting musical services that go into the creation of a musical product, and the marketing and distribution side comes after someone has a physical product.
So that made me think about this. At the moment, So there seems to be a conflict in how to sell it. Because like we always say, blockchains can basically destroy an entire industry that's based on being a middleman to a transaction. And that includes record labels, right? Because they sit in between the creator and the consumer, right? And all the stakeholders that you talked about, the writers and all the rights holders, musicians, beat makers, all that kind of stuff, right? So on the one hand, we're going to sell it to the artists on the basis that you'll have full sovereignty over your digital assets, and you don't need the record label anymore, and they don't take their cut. But how do we sell that to record labels? Because we're selling their own destruction, if you know what I mean. But do you even need their cooperation?
Well, so Spotify did this, and essentially it was a service for musicians to use Spotify as a platform, but it was so efficient and popular that record labels had to jump in to be a part of that sort of trend, and even Spotify had problems dealing with copyrights, and they had a big chunk of money that they just didn't know who to send to, and yeah. So there's a lot of problem with this, but however, if something is efficient and is a good model to replace an existing practice or to sort of smoothen it or revolutionize it, people do get on board.
Yeah, so whoever has users has the power a lot of the time, right? Do we have any more questions bubbling up in the room? Any more questions bubbling up? All right. You want to close it there, mate?
Yeah?
All right, one more round of applause for Pranav.
Thank you.